There's some confusion about what Terry Guo actually said here. He made some remarks. An assistant later clarified them, Mark. What exactly did he say and what did he mean?
Right, so I think the context here is very important, right? I think this might be getting a little blown out of proportion because this is the guy who is in charge of Foxconn, helped create Foxconn for many years. And of course, Foxconn is where Apple produces pretty much all of its iPhones outside of India right now, out of China. And now he stepped down to run for president of Taiwan. Wouldn't it benefit him greatly if Apple moved some of his production from China to Taiwan? Wouldn't he look really good as president? Wouldn't it be a really good campaign slogan for him to say he's trying to get the iPhone to move from Foxconn to Taiwan? So I think people have to understand what's going on here. There's the political side for him, there's a political side for Apple. So he has a lot to gain by making this happen.
Gene, bigger picture, all of this is based on a report from the Nikkei a couple of days ago that Apple asked many of its China-based suppliers, and Foxconn is a Taiwanese company but manufactures iPhones in China, asked these China-based suppliers to consider moving production outside of China, perhaps to Southeast Asia. Do you think that would ever happen? And what are your broader thoughts on the implications of Apple even considering this at this point?
Emily, I think that very well will happen in time, and I point back to 4 years ago when Apple started to consider doing production with Foxconn outside, actually in Brazil, because of some of the tax laws, the import laws in Brazil. And so I think that this motivation for Apple to essentially de-risk themselves with China, I think, is nothing new. The timing on it is suspicious, and probably the truth is several layers beneath the surface about why Apple's talking about that now. But I do believe that outside of all the things that are going on with trade, Apple has a long-standing interest in diversifying outside of China for the manufacturing.
Now, Mark, without getting too deep into Taiwanese politics, Terry Guo has pitched himself as a China-first candidate. This doesn't sound very China-first, but what are the sort of broader political implications here of Apple considering moving its factories outside of China anywhere, and perhaps even to Taiwan?
Yeah, this could be seen a little bit as a lose-lose situation for Apple. I mean, you've seen the struggles that Apple's competitors, such as Google and others, have had in China. Apple is the rare major US or non-Chinese tech company to actually be mostly free to function in China. Most of their services work there. They have dozens of retail stores across the region. They've had a lot of success there revenue-wise in the last 5 to 7 years or so as well. That can't be said for Google and others. So if Apple starts stripping out parts of production from China, that's going to cost a lot of jobs. Apple's responsible for about 3.5 million supply chain jobs in China alone. If those jobs start going away, it's going to hurt the Chinese economy, and China is going to have less of a will to want to work with Apple to keep them in their stature in the region right now.
Meantime, Gene, you've got a new note just out on Apple's reputation in China. What have you found?
So, Emily, we've been monitoring this closely since really May 5th when the trade dispute with China started to flare up, and then with Huawei too. And what we wanted to get a sense was with what the typical Chinese consumer, if they'd be boycotting Apple products, and try to get a read too on what the government is thinking. And as we've gone back over the past month and looked at social media within China and also the broader China news media outlets, the Reddit of China, all of those have a surprisingly supportive tone relative to Apple. And the reason why I think that this is important is that the tone in the media is directed from the top. It comes from the government. There is no question about that. And I think that there is an insight in terms of how China wants to operate and work with Apple potentially, or potentially do some tariffs against them. And I think if you take in this very clear view that, in fact, the government is putting a positive narrative out related to Apple, I think that's a sign that the government wants to continue to work. Exactly like Mark said, 3.5 million supply chain jobs. They don't want to disrupt that. So I think that that is a positive for Apple. I just want to briefly mention, too, is that what the typical consumer, even though on social media they're speaking relatively positive or are overwhelmingly positive about Apple, that doesn't mean that the typical consumer feels that way. There could still be an impact of a negative iPhone number in China based on some of the things that are going on in the geopolitical world.